Welcome to Older Militarist Radio TV, and we're lifelong Catholics. And what we do is all for free, and for the love of Jesus Christ, and for our Holy Mother, the Church, and we'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Today is episode 2, when we're talking about Larium or Mefloquine. And let's see if we get our notes up here. There we go. So, as we said yesterday, the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness will not like these programs, especially today's program. And all we're doing is bringing it to your attention. Then, well, again, at the end of this program, we'll be talking about the need for reform and to end this dangerous drug experiment on our soldiers. So welcome, Brother Alexis.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Ordo Militaris Radio TV, where we talk about a lot of different issues, always from a Catholic point of view, unlike most so-called social media apostolates on the internet that are called Catholic. They're just attend to catechesis or the faith or issues of church politics. Catholicism is not a religion that you confine just to the church. We don't hold that error. If you watch us, you know that. And however, since no one in either of our families in recent decades has been in the military, we weren't too familiar with what's going on in the military and what military guys are really suffering. I've talked to so many military recruits who contact us at Ordo Militaris Inc. in Montana, and I always make sure to ask them what is post-traumatic, if they have suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome. But I can't say I was too informed about it, and this series is going to help you understand why there's so much of this in the modern military, especially armed forces. And we discussed that in the courses yesterday. We talk about specific drugs given to soldiers and what are their horrible and nightmarish effects. Now, AJ, I can remember it because I don't know how many years ago, but I'll ask you when it took place. But I remember years ago, there was a story about special ops guys coming back from Afghanistan to their base in South Carolina, and like 4, 6 of them attacked their wives, and there were multiple murders all within a few weeks. It was bizarre. The media didn't delve in it too much. Now, years later, what do we know about what happened? What days are we talking about? What month? What year?
So, Mefloquine was implicated in the Fort Bragg murder-suicides of 2002, in which 4 military wives were killed and 2 of the partners that killed them then committed suicide. When a Canadian airborne regiment involved in a mid-1990s humanitarian mission in Somalia committed seemingly inexplicable acts of violence, torture, and aggression, they have been taking Mefloquine. And it has also been associated with a number of other standalone incidents.
And these are horrible murders. In one case, one of the husbands stabbed his wife like 76 times. So this is a drug that can turn you into a psychopathic barbarian, a demon. What is this drug supposed to be used for? Who developed it? How long has it been given to humans?
Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay. Mefloquine was formulated at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research in the 1970s. Shortly after the end of the Vietnam War, Mefloquine was number 142.490 of a total of 250,000 anti-malarial compounds screened during the study. Mefloquine was the first public-private venture between the U.S. Department of Defense and a pharmaceutical company. the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research transferred all its Phase 1, Phase 2 clinical trial to Hoffman LaRoche and Simon Klein. FDA approved as a treatment for malaria was swift. Most notably, Phase 3 safety and tolerability trials were skipped. The drug was first approved in Switzerland in 1984 by Hoffmann La Roche, who brought it to the market with the name Valerian. Anything else?
So it's an anti-malaria drug, and they tested 250,000 when they got this one, and they rushed it right through. Something doesn't seem right. So, besides, is the drug effective against malaria? Do we have any information on that?
um, uh,
For example, does Wikipedia say it's effective against malaria? Has it cite any studies or?
it does say it is useful for prevention of malaria in all areas except for those where parasites may have resistance to multiple medications. It is one of the several antimalarial medications recommended by the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Okay, so for those in the audience that don't know, malaria is not a bacteria or a virus, it's a parasite. And once it gets in you within the first day, it produces like millions of offspring and every day thereafter. And so if it's not treated, it can debilitate your health. We Europeans are much more susceptible to it than Africans. Africans have a natural resistance to it, almost kills no one. But Europeans can drop dead from it. In fact, it appears to be, there was a famous American journalist in December who died of malaria just a few days after contracting it. But what is the real dark side to this drug? And how does it happen to have this effect? Is it to happen everyone that takes it once, so you have to take it a long time? Or?
So, methylquin and many related quinoline antimalarial drugs induce idiosyncratic intoxication reaction that is often preceded by subtle prodromal indicating the onset of a condition's symptoms that may be difficult for an individual soldier to identify, particularly in combat settings, explains Dr. Nevin. The syndrome can begin with a subtle mood or personality change, a sense of unease or foreboding in vivid dreams. With time, and particularly with continued dosing, this can progress to frank anxiety, confusion, restlessness, or depression. In certain subtle individuals with time or continued dosing, the syndrome can progress further to frank psychosis, with paranoia, delusion, hallucinations, and depersonalization. This psychosis is particularly frightening and associated with a risk of particularly grisly violence and suicide. I often compare this toxic reaction to that illustrated in M. Night Shyamalan's film, The Happening. At its worst, Mefloquine is a horror film in a pill.
Now, so for those who aren't familiar with the terminology, psychosis is where what you perceive about the world around you isn't the real world around you. You perceive another world. This is a very dangerous drug. It can turn someone to a total psychotic murderer because he doesn't know what he's doing. He's not aware of it. It's like divorces the conscience from the perception. And this endocrine toxic reaction isn't the drug itself that's altering the mind, but the way the body reacts to this drug. Now, out of 250,000, medicines you could have tested for preventing malaria, it's kind of suspicious they chose this one and started giving it to guys in the military with abandon. But one thing from what you just said doesn't make sense. If only in certain people with psychological dispositions end up in a final state of total psychosis and psychopathy, how is it that 4 members of special ops team in Afghanistan are highly trained, highly observed psychologically? These are really sound psychological guys. If you ever met anyone in special forces, they are very sane, self-controlled individuals. They might be expert killers, but it doesn't mean they're insane. And why drug caused 4 of them all in the same, I think it was month or within 6 weeks, to get involved in this. So,
and the report goes on, Dr. Nevin's involvement began when he was trained by the U.S. military as a preventive medicine physician, which included significant study in the prevention of travel and development-related diseases, including malaria. He was taught that the military developed antimalarial, including Mefloquine, were generally as safe and well tolerated, and that these were ideally suited to military missions owing to their weekly dosing schedule. So you get 1 pill a week, and
it's that
there's
strong.
4, and there's 4 in the square.
That they send you. Now, what do the soldiers call this pill when they take it?
So they called it a horror pill. A horror movie in a
Horror
pill.
movie night when they take this pill? Yeah. So, you have to search long and hard to find the right chemicals to produce horror, because that has to target a certain part of the brain that handles fear and the imagination all at once. And depending on your personal chemical balance, your psychology, you may or may not have ever had a horror nightmare. Some people get them frequently. Some people almost never get them. I thank God I almost never get a nightmare. You know how scary it is if you actually have had one. But imagine a medicine that gives you one every week, or that the more you take it, you get them all the time. This is a diabolic medicine. Do we have do you have any gathered information on the effects on soldiers in general who taking this medicine, other than 4 Canadian unit?
Yeah, so here. Many individuals in my unit suffered very disturbing and vivid dreams, changes in personality and mood, very dramatically altered personality, says Niven. While it was very easy to attribute these psychological changes in the context of deployment to being in the war zone and being away from home, I recognize that many of these problems could very well be due to the drug. This psychosis is particularly frightening and is associated with a risk of particularly grisly violence and suicide. It was a death of a well-liked soldier in Nevin's unit under mysterious circumstances that inspired him to investigate Mefloquine in more depth. The otherwise healthy individual was found dead in his quarters with no evidence of suicide. Nevin realized during the course of the investigation he had been misprescribed Mefloquine. He had been diagnosed with a number of health problems in the weeks immediately prior to his deployment, and he should not have been prescribed Mefloquine with these medical questions unresolved, says Nevin. He was also prescribed with a number of other drugs that should not have been taken simultaneously with Mefloquine. I began to wonder whether Mefloquine had played some role in his death.
He died of a nightmare. or for some interaction with other drugs. This is a really serious affair. Parents, patriotic parents around the country raise their kids up to love the country, want to defend the country, and it is their joy and their pride that their son and daughter goes off and joins one of the branches of the U.S. Armed Forces. This is a nightmare that their children are being experimented on or overdosed with drugs. And no one would expect it. I don't think the general public even knows it. There's all just general stories, but in this series, I want to focus on this. But that your son would be misprescribed medicine and die from it is a horrible tragedy. In the civil war, you could sue and get resolution. If this happens in the military, there's usually a cover-up that goes on for decades and decades. And we're not talking about just VA hospitals. We're talking about soldiers in the field. Do we have any statistics on broad numbers of bad reactions to this medicine, or over the years, have they military changed its policy and whether they use this? Like, was it used more in the 80s, 90s, and less now?
Okay, so the use of mefloquine declined sharply during the Iraq wars that started in 2003. Rather than representing the recognition of the dangers it posed, the military claimed the decision to discontinue its use was due to the fact that there was no mefloquine-resistant strain of malaria. But over time, the military realized that there was very little to no malaria in Iraq at all, and use of the drug subsided. Unfortunately, the end of
Mm-hmm.
mefloquine's story, the military medical community that had developed the drug and had been a strong advocate of its use was still very much of the opinion that this is a safe and effective drug in 2004 and into 2005. It reported that methylquine is given to inmates at Guantanamo Bay, and the British Ministry of Defense still issues it to 22,500 soldiers a year.
Okay, so, I don't believe the U.S. military excuse about not using methylquine in Mesopotamia because even in anthropology class in the 80s, we were taught that malaria is only endemic in places where there are swamps with trees in them because the special species of mosquito that carries malaria breeds on the trunks of submerged trees. It doesn't breed on reeds or grass growing in swamps. It has to be wood. And if you know anything about the geography of Mesopotamia, you know there's no trees anywhere near the rivers or the woods of very, very little, if at any at all. Maybe in a garden or something is about the closest you get to it. So they would have known that.
Yeah,
So
so
they were dishing that thing out for some reason, and they're a great excuse for not using it. But at least they're using it less. Although, if you're the parent of a member of the armed forces of the United Kingdom, pay attention to this and ask your son and daughter if they're being given Lariam, also known as methylpin, is the actual medical name.
and we're going to get into why we're not sure how this video is going to go once we get it uploaded. The army fears rebellion on Larium.
That's actually a title of a news report. So what does this report say? When did it come out, AJ?
Wednesday, August 28th, 2002, and they still fear it to this day.
Mm-hmm. Because this is
U.S.
a dangerous drug.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
the U.S. military is worried. Press attention to the possible link between the recent spate of slayings and suicides at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and Larium, a widely prescribed anti-malarial drug, could prompt soldiers to resist taking it. Army officials tell United Press International. The officials who asked not to be named fear the army may end up with a rebellion on its hands like the one over the anthrax vaccine. If that happens, they say Army will have a bigger health problem than any possible malarium side effects. Soldiers exposing themselves to the risk of contracting malaria. The public resistance to the anthrax vaccination program was largely fomented by information available on various internet websites that allege a long list of health side effects for the vaccine. But the concerns of some soldiers were also fed by the military's unfortunate history with medical research and treatment, especially during wartime. The number of
Hmm.
anthrax
But you
vaccine,
know,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead. No, continue.
I'll go ahead.
I was going to say, here's another. This news article itself sounds like it's been read by military censors and changed because malaria is not a deadly disease. If you catch malaria, it's probably never going to kill you. You might have a day of fever once every year. That's it. Um, that's about it. Okay. While it is true that if you contract malaria, mosquitoes could pick it up from you and spread it in your neighborhood. In most of the world, that species of mosquito doesn't exist, so it's impossible. And in most parts of the world, the swamps have been drained, like in Europe. So, you know, what they're afraid of is legal issues, and maybe even the pharmaceutical company producers afraid of that light would be shined on this. But this was a great tragedy, and the number of men who died from it, and it seems to be a lot more toxic than even some of these reports are saying, because how could six guys, four guys kill their wives and then two of them take their own lives? And they didn't do it on the same night. They didn't plan it together. It was all individual cases. So they were probably coming off of mefloquine. We talked about this yesterday. What is the problem a soldier encounters when he comes off these medicines?
So, yeah, when they start to come off the malarium and other things that the military doctors are giving them weekly, they're facing, typical uh, coming off of things, aggression, their hearts racing, their minds racing. They can't think, they can't sleep. Um, they're just they're in a very bad place where they just don't know what they're if they're in real life or if they're um, in some sort of nightmare dream world.
Yeah. So this is like this is drug withdrawal.
Mm.
And if you have any friend or family member or relative who's come back from deployment and recently left the military and starts acting strange, this should be your first gut reaction. He's having a drug withdrawal for something he got, and get him medical attention and get him to calm down and see that this is what he needs to do, and bring him to a local hospital where they're not going to malpractice on him, but they know something about drug treatment, or a drug treatment center that knows about these drugs and their effects. And if you are in the military, pay attention to what drugs you are taking and what the names are. Write them down and put them in your wallet. So if you start freaking out somewhere, someone can get you help because they know what you've been taking, what the dosage was. And this is a terrible tragedy that this medicine was used.
Yeah.
The investigative reporters will one day write a book about it. Do you have more on that, or what are the other medicines we'll talk about in the next two programs?
Yeah. So on the show page today, everybody can read about the news reports about the killings, and you can finish reading the 14-page report on the on the drug. It's real easy reading. There's not too many big medical word terms, so it's very easy to read, and we highly suggest you do so. So next week we'll finish up with, oh boy, here we go. Botulinum toxoid, which is an injection that was given to the Gulf War soldiers to protect them, supposedly protect them from any nuclear agents. Then they also gave them bromide pills, all again to so-called protect them from any nuclear agents. But
Okay.
yeah,
These have very bad side effects. And these two medications were given with criminal intent because we now know that the Pentagon knew that there were no nuclear weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It was completely fake narrative to justify the war. And so to justify that narrative by poisoning tens of thousands of armed forces with dangerous medicines is beyond evil. And thank you, AJ, for having the willingness to talk about these. This is very sensitive, a very important topic for anyone who's in the military, has a family member in the military. Most of us knew nothing about this, and this will hopefully will open the dialogue among Catholics who have from military families.
this is Order Military Studio TV signing off. Day is full.
There's full.